I'm Kiran Makkar, and I have been coaching students for the IELTS test in Punjab, India for the last 12 years. Today, I'm going to discuss with you a graph which has been seen in the past in the academic IELTS writing test. The graphs below show the percentage of people born in Australia and out of Australia living in cities, town, and rural areas. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So here you can see there are 2 years given, 1950 and 2010, and people born in Australia and out of Australia living in cities, towns, and rural areas. The given column graphs illustrate the proportion of native and non native Australians residing in cities, towns, and rural areas. So, native is people born in Australia, and people born outside Australia are the non native Australians. A cursory glance at the graphs is enough to make it clear that the maximum native and non native Australians lived in cities, whereas the minimum resided in villages over the given period of 6 decades. So here you can see the maximum lived in cities, be it native or non-native. They lived in cities, and the minimum lived in villages, cities and towns. So the maximum lived in urban areas and minimum lived in villages um, over a period of 6 decades. In 1950, a little over a half native Australians and three-fifths non native Australians lived in cities. So here it is a little over a half. It's 50, so little over a half, and this is non-native. This is three-fifths. 60 is three-fifths. So uh, three-fifths lived in cities. Non-natives lived in cities. So I've used this terminology which I normally use in the pie chart, a little over a half or three-fifths, but that is because this total number comes to 100 and this total number comes to 100. So I have used that vocabulary here. You can see if in the column graph the percentages are shown, which can be, if the column graph can be converted to a pie chart, then it is safe to use that vocabulary in the column graph. Okay, then an almost equal percentage lived in towns, whereas the least percentage native and non-native Australians lived in villages. So an almost equal percentage. Here you can see it's almost 25 and almost 25. An almost equal percentage lived in towns, and whereas 20 and 16% lived in the rural areas, native and non-natives. In 2010, there was a slight increase in the percentage of both native and non native Australians. The native Australians increased from 55 to 63%. So it's 63, and here it is 70. So living in cities, I must native and non native Australians living in cities. The native Australians increased from 55 to 63%, uh, whereas the non-native Australians grew from 60% to 70%. The percentage of town dwellers remained the same, whereas those residing in villages decreased significantly from roughly 20 to 12% in the case of native Australians and from 15 to 5% in the case of non-native Australians. So here you can see percentage of town dwellers, it's 25 here also. So it remained the same. Whereas those residing in villages decreased significantly from 20 to almost 10%, 10-12%, and from 16 to almost 5% in the case of non-native Australians. Overall, it can be seen that more non-native than native Australians lived in cities over the given period of 60 years beginning 1950. So this is my explanation of these two column graphs. I hope you've liked the explanation. You can write it in many ways. but you can make paragraphs for cities, towns, and rural areas. You can make paragraphs for the 2 years, as I have done. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching patiently.